Hello everyone and welcome back to Foundational JavaScript. I'm Gray Lewis and this is the final section in our Foundational JavaScript course. Today I want to introduce you to the project we're going to be building over the next few lessons. We're going to be taking a lot of the knowledge that we've learned in previous lessons and sort of pulling it together to make a rather simple example application. And our plan for this example application is to take this API here, which a friendly developer has published for us, which is essentially a dictionary API. So we're able to, in any number of languages, hit that API with a word, and it will send us back a whole lot of information: the phonetics, the meanings, the definition, the part of speech. And we're going to basically be making a very simple dictionary app. That we will be doing all in terms of the front end. So as you might be aware, typically when we're making a real web application, there's going to be a back end and a front end. So some of the logic of the application will be performed by a server, and some of the logic will be performed by the client, right? So in this case, we're completely bypassing the idea of having our own backend. This API is essentially our backend in a way, right? Like we are just building a front end to this API. So although we are making somewhat of a web application, it is sort of a simplified example. And it is really rare to actually run into an application that is written in pure vanilla, we would call it JavaScript. So we're really not going to be using any libraries. We're not going to be using Node.js or any comparable library. We are just going to be using browser-side JavaScript to make API fetches, and we're going to be using that content to manipulate the contents of the page and present it to the users. So I hope you're excited to dive in, as excited as I am. And yeah, let's go show you the actual example we'll be working on. I've already coded it. I've coded my version of the app, which I hope you'll follow along and make your own version. And yeah, so we can just really type in anything here, and we'll see that it is able to look up that definition from the dictionary API. And it's really that simple. And it populates, here's the part of the speech, here's an example sentence with the word in it. I also just put a little disclaimer down here just to make it look a little more nice, put in an icon here. And yeah, so this is basically what we're going to be rewriting. I'm going to walk you through how I wrote it, how all the pieces sort of come together to form this. And yeah, I'm super excited to be kicking off this final section in this course, and I'm so glad that you guys have stuck with me the whole way through this. I hope you learned something from it, and yeah, I look forward to the next few lessons. I think we're gonna have fun with it. We are building out this little dictionary app that I showed you in the last video, and today I want to take you through some of the boilerplate, some of the basic stuff. A little less JavaScript related, but still important, because most of the time we're not going to be operating with just JavaScript. We'll also be interacting with HTML and CSS. So today we're going to be setting up the visual part of the front end. And if you'll remember, this is simply a dictionary app where we can type in a word, get the definition, and that's obviously sourced from an API provided by lexico.com. I will be sharing the link for that, of course, and also I think it was visible in the last video. So let's get started. So I've already sort of set up the non-functional part of the HTML code here, stuff that you don't necessarily need to be familiar with. I will give you a quick run through, but these are really just some finicky little things that I'm doing to add things like the logo here and the custom font that I'm using here, and etc. But these are things that you don't necessarily have to do if you're following along yourself. These three links here essentially are making calls to the Google Font API, which just allows us to use the fonts that are hosted on the web instead of locally on our computer. And these are just boilerplate things that you will find snippets of on the actual Google API website, and you literally just copy paste that into the head of your document to embed a font. And then here I'm using that material icons font to insert that dictionary icon that we can see here, right here. And finally, we have the little footer that I've created, which is just this little decoration thing here that I made to give credit to the API, and also put in my little promo, my little name there. But yes, overall, none of these are really functionally part of how the dictionary app is going to actually do the logic of fetching the dictionary definition for us. On the other hand, this is an important thing for you to keep track of. So the form element in HTML is a special element. It is extremely functional, and what we need to do with it is basically we need to add a handler to the element itself called onSubmit. And so if you've ever filled out a HTML form before, which you definitely have, you'll know that you can press enter, for example, to complete the form, or you can press the submit button. And then the website will do the logic of logging you in, for example, or maybe making a new account, right? And so these are really useful. This is a really useful element, and it's also really functional. You kind of need to use this if you want to have a semantic website, which we covered briefly, but also it just handles a lot of the functionality for us. Now, because this is JavaScript, we could just, make these elements ourselves custom and handle all of the logic of submitting the form and all of those things ourselves. But that's a big pain in the ass, and it's non-standard. So we would end up kind of messing with ourselves a little bit, kind of giving ourselves extra work by having to handle that ourselves, and it would probably end up being a lot buggier. So I think universally almost it is considered the best practice to just use an HTML form. And I'm just going to give it the class name of form, and then here is where we have to attach a little bit of logic. Although we haven't actually created this function yet, this will be a call of a function that we're going to define inside of script tags in our head. And we will see that in the next lesson. And then because we are not actually going to refresh the page, normally when you submit a form, you're actually going to navigate to a different web page, right? So if I log in, the website's going to submit, and then the server will handle logic and serve me a new web page. But since in this case, as you saw, when we look up a definition, it just inserts it into the page instead of navigating away, we have to do this little trick here and return false after the onSubmit call. And then we have two types of input elements. The search bar, which is just a normal input, no special type. And then the submit button, which is the same input element, but then within the type attribute of this element, we're going to put submit. And what this will do is allow us to trigger the onSubmit function when we hit submit. And also it means that the form is, in terms of semantic HTML, the form is now very able to be interacted with by maybe people who can't see, right? They're using a reader device, anything like that. This makes it very clear that this is a button that you can press to submit a form. And that's another big reason why we need to use the form element instead of handling that logic ourselves. And then finally, we have this little bit of HTML code, which is going to be where we actually insert the data of the definition once we get it back. As you can see, what I have here is one div to handle inserting the example, one div for handling the definition, and one div for handling the part of speech. That's the noun, adverb, that little piece of bold text that we see at the top. And you can see that in the definition area, I actually have a placeholder text. So if we go to the website, this div is already here, and we have a text here saying search for a word to see its definition. That just gives a little bit of instant feedback, a little bit of clarity to the user of what should be expected. So that's pretty much the final piece of the actual functional part of the HTML that we'll be interacting with our HTML code. And then I just want to cover one little bit of the actual JavaScript before we move on to the next video. And that is actually storing those elements as variables. So we've touched on this before, but what I want to do here is we're going to let these variables, and what that means is that we've given them a name, we've assigned them to the global scope inside of these script tags, and then when we use this little handler, the window.onLoad handler, the content, the assigning that we're about to do inside of this function will not be local to this function. So we're going to basically just use the query selector method on the document object and assign for container. That's the outer div here that's going to hold all of those other elements. And then the same thing for the part of speech element, the definition element, and the example element, right? So we're just using the document.query selector with a CSS selector in here, the class, the dot to indicate that we're searching for a class, and then the name of that class. And now we've successfully assigned these elements to these variables, and now inside of the function that we're going to write in the next lesson to actually dynamically fetch this data and insert them into these elements, we will be able to use these references to handle that logic. All right, so thank you guys so much for sticking through. I hope everything was clear in this lesson. Yeah, this is a slightly less interesting lesson. We're sort of just writing boilerplate and getting ready to do the function logic. But I think that, it's exciting always to build these things yourselves, really get a hands-on feel for what it means to be writing JavaScript that interacts with a web page. And I really recommend that you try doing these things for yourself. Don't necessarily just copy all the code I'm writing. Instead, especially when it comes to the CSS that we're going to be inserting. Oh, actually, I should quickly do that right now. So I'm going to, as always, just create a little style tag. And I'm just pasting in all of my CSS. This will be available if you want to take a look at it, but as I was saying before, I really think that you should try writing the CSS yourself, if that sounds interesting to you, and mess around with it, because CSS is one of those things where it's all hands-on knowledge. It's just write it a lot and you'll get used to it. As you can see, this is a significant amount of CSS, but you really don't have to go that hard. Just make a nice little simple interface to go with this logic that we'll be writing we've written in this lesson and we will be writing in the next lesson. You've seen it fully working before, but right now, up until the point that we reached in the last lesson, we've only got to the point that we have the visual part of it done. As you can see, if I try to define a word, nothing happens. And we gotta write that last function to attach to the onSubmit method on this form that we have built out here. So this is basically going to be pulling together those asynchronous data fetching lessons that we worked on. We worked on briefly before, and we are going to be finally pulling that together to make this dictionary app. And I'm so excited to be finishing this up. It has been such a journey recording this course. I hope that you got something out of it. And let's get started with this last lesson. So we literally only have to write this one function. As we discussed last time, we have the onSubmit function that we've written here, which requires this fetch definition function. And that's basically what we have to write today. We just have to write that fetch definition function. So I'm going to go into the script section. And now that we've defined all of the pieces, right? All of the we've written all of this code here. We simply have to write this function that will take that data that we're going to get from the API and plug the responses into these elements. So we simply use that function syntax we're so familiar with. And then we are going to quickly, one thing that we actually forgot to define last time was the search bar. So I'm going to go ahead and let the search. But then after that, we simply need to go ahead and query the search value on when we click the submit button. This function is triggered, right? Then we're going to take this value of the search element that we've defined up here, and then we're going to turn it to lowercase because the API requires the query to be in all lowercase. And then we need to fashion a request to this API based on that data. And as we covered when we were looking through the documentation, essentially all we have to do is look at this URL, this endpoint at their API, and we're specifying that we were looking for an English word here. And then we are just going to, using that template literal syntax, inject the word that we've defined up here into this phrase, into this URL rather. And then we are going to use that then to first parse our response and turn it into an object. And then we are going to take the actual response object and we are going to do the actual logic, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to edit the text of the definition element that we talked about before. And we're going to, I've already looked through how the responses are structured. And this is essentially where the actual definition is held. We looked at before the whole dictionary response, and this is where it is located. And there's one last thing that I want to show you regarding that. That is this app called Postman. Postman is a really popular application for exploring APIs. And what I mean by that is essentially Postman is going to let us craft requests manually to a given endpoint, right? And it's going to let us really inspect the data that comes back. So if we go ahead and just go ahead and make a new request here in Postman, and you can install this from the Postman website. If you just Google Postman, it will come up. And then we're going to use this thing this URL that we're crafting here to investigate this response that's going to be returned by the API. So if I send it here, we'll see the body of the response here, and we can see it in more detail. And we see that there's an array where there's only one object in this array. And we see that the word that we're querying is hello, so this is the object we need. So we're going to need to choose the 0th element right here in the response. And then we just need to use this is an object, so we're going to use the meanings key to get the value here, which is an object, which contains the definitions, as well as the part of speech, which we want, and the example, which we also want. And you can see how that sort of corresponds here to the definition query that we've destructured here. So we're taking the response, checking at the meaning meaning property on that object. Then we're going to go to the 0th element in that array here. As we can see, that's an array based on the brackets. And then we go to the definitions object on that, which is this object, and then we're taking the definition property off of that. So you can see how that object is a huge object that we have to navigate to get to this actual data. And then we basically just do the same thing for the other parts. We're going to go ahead and use the part of speech data that we got returned, and we're also going to take the example. And then we're also using that short-circuiting feature that we talked about before, where if this is undefined, because I've found that on the API sometimes examples aren't included, then we'll short-circuit to an example not available text just to at least explain why there's no example, right? And not just throw some undefined error or something like that. And then finally, we just want to catch that error. So if there's maybe someone tries to look up a word that doesn't exist, that's the main thing that we're going to have to be thinking about, right? First, we're going to console log the error just for debugging purposes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the definition element's inner text to an error, right? That word is not defined in our dictionary, check for spelling errors and try again. And then we're also going to put the part of speech to error, which basically will, make that nice. It'll just make it nice and well formatted, and we'll have that little bolded text at the top to let us know that there's been an error. And then we'll set the example inner text to nothing, just in case there's already a definition from a previous request. And that is basically it. If we go ahead and open this with our live server, and then we type in hello, we'll see that indeed it is functioning as we expect. And if we type in a word that doesn't exist, error, that word is not defined in our dictionary, check for spelling errors and try again. And it's that simple, right? So this is a fully fledged project in a way. There are plenty of projects that you can make with only a front end. And this is only a foundational JavaScript course. I'm not really here to explain to you what the structure of full apps are, but I assume that if you're interested in this, you're interested in applying it later on. And this is really the core knowledge set that you need to have. How to request APIs, and then later maybe how to design APIs so that you can have your own, logic on the back end handling that data flow. But in terms of being a front-end engineer, you need to know how to handle APIs, handle asynchronous data. You need to know how to interact with the DOM, although rarely will you actually be doing it in vanilla JavaScript. The concepts that you've learned in this course will inform how you use libraries that will probably handle interacting with the document object model for you. And yeah, this is, I think, a solid foundation for anyone who's looking to get more interested, to look deeper into what JavaScript can do for us as web developers. But yeah, I have to say this has been a huge pleasure being your instructor for this course. I hope that you had a good time. I hope that you were able to, challenge yourself, do some of these, follow along as I do these demonstrations, and maybe even came up with a project of your own. Yeah, it's been a great experience for me, and I hope it was a great experience for you. So thank you so much for sticking with me the whole way through this course. I hope that you really, got something out of it. I hope you have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.